Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and organize around the eco-socialist platform that Angela Walker and I ran on. So I think the big news from an eco-socialist point of view this week is the auto strike. Began on last night, Thursday night. Thursday night at midnight or Friday morning at midnight. And the union's calling it a stand-up strike, which is kind of a nod to the historic sit-down strikes the UAW did back in the 30s that really established them as the auto workers union. And the stand-up strike is, when at midnight, 3 plants went out. And they were key plants in terms of the production chains. So it puts a crimp in the production for the big 3. This is the first time the auto workers have struck the big 3 automakers in the US at the same time. So that's unique. And the auto workers president, Shawn Fain, has said, they need a historic contract because, quote, record profits mean time for a record contract. And there's been 3 decades, at least 3 or 4, of concessions by the United Auto Workers. One of their demands is to eliminate tiers. In 2007, they agreed to tiers where people hired after 2007 are paid at a much lower rate than the people with seniority. And they want big wage increases. The 3 CEOs of the big 3 had their pay spike 40% on average over the last 4 years. The average UAW worker in 1972 made $4.79 an hour, which would be $35.78 today. And today, only the top tier senior workers are averaging close to that at $33 an hour. But the lower tier workers, those hired since 2007, average just $17 an hour. In some markets, you can get that working at McDonald's. So the average auto worker hired since 2007 makes less than half of what the average auto worker made in 1972. And as I've talked about here before, that's similar to what happened to the UPS Teamsters, who make half of what they made in 1972. The top wage now at the end of this contract is $49 an hour for senior drivers, compared to $72 an hour in 1972, which was the starting wage at $10 an hour that year. So this is symptomatic of what's happened to the working class in this country over the last 50 years. Another demand is they want to restore the cost of living adjustments, the COLAs, which they lost, they gave up during the bailout the government provided for these automakers during the Great Recession financial crisis in 2009. They want to restore defined benefit pensions for all auto workers. Since 2007, there have not been defined benefit pensions for the new hires. They get 401ks, a little bit investment by the company, but that's very different. That puts all the risk on the worker in the stock market instead of giving them a defined benefit they will get upon retirement. They're also demanding the right to strike over plant closures. The big 3 have closed 65 plants over the last 20 years, which has devastated those hometowns. And the auto workers want the right to defend their communities. They want a working family protection program. So if companies try a shutdown, they'll have to pay the UAW members to do community service work to help rebuild the community as a result of the devastation of the shutdown. They want to, what they call, end the abuse of temp workers, and not eliminate temp workers, but reduce them. Temp workers start at $15.78 an hour and max out at only $19.28 after 4 years. And so the company's using as many of those as it can to reduce its wage costs, and they don't have the same benefits. And they want more paid time off so they can be with their families. And they're calling for 32 hours work for 40 hours pay, which is a demand we've had since the 1930s, which was put forward by progressives in Congress as a way to expand employment and keep income up, to keep the economy, keep demand up in the economy. And they want 5 weeks paid vacation, which I don't think is that big a demand. I mean, when I was working at UPS, after seniority, I got 2 weeks vacation when I started, and every 5 years I got 5 more, up to 6 weeks. So I was getting 6 weeks paid vacation in the last years I was working there, and that's decent. So 5 weeks is not out of reach, and it's common in Europe, those kinds of paid vacations. And then they want to significantly increase retiree pay. There hasn't been an increase in almost 20 years. And I think that refers to the pensions, but I'm not sure. I'm not clear on that demand, but that's what they're asking. So the workers are only going to get $500 a week out of the UAW's $825 million strike fund. Now, if they all go out, which they're prepared to do if necessary, that fund will last 3 months. That's one of the reasons for the stand-up strike, selective strategic strikes at certain plants. So the strike fund can last longer. And, just to look at the disparities, CEO salaries for GM, Mary Barra's compensation, including bonus and stock awards, grew by 34% between 2019 and 2022 to $29 million last year, $29 million a year. The Ford CEO, including the bonus and stock awards, his pension grew by 21%. So he got 21 million last year. And then Stellantis, which is owned in the Netherlands, they bought out Chrysler. That's the other big three now. That guy, Carlos Tavares, made $25 million last year, including long-term incentives. So, the disparity between a temp starting at $15.78 an hour and these guys getting tens of millions of dollars a year is just obscene. Now, there's some issues that will come out in this strike and going forward. And one of them is a just transition to electric vehicles. Electric vehicles require fewer parts, which means fewer jobs, less manufacturing. So how in the contract and future contracts can they share the productivity gains that means with the workers? And so artificial intelligence and automation is a key issue going forward. And the other big issue is the non-union automakers, especially in the right-to-work states, where 72% of U.S. auto production now takes place. And there are a lot of non-union automakers out there, Tesla, Rivian, and VinFast, who specialize in electric vehicles, are non-union. Nissan, Toyota, Honda, BMW, Volkswagen, Mercedes, Hyundai, and Kia all have manufacturing, mostly in right-to-work states, that is non-union in this country, even though in their home countries, they are unionized. So there's a lot at stake in this strike. And, if you're in a place where there is a strike going on, one of these, they're mostly the two, I think Toledo, they're in the Midwest, Michigan and Ohio, join the picket lines. But also, just speak out in social media, show support for these people. That will put pressure on the company. And this strike may spread. So, pay attention to what's going on in your community. And let's, support these workers. They get a good contract that sets a standard that, hopefully then they can begin to organize the non-union automakers and the labor movement gets stronger. I mean, it's one of the things I talked about with UPS. They've got to expand organization unions to Amazon and FedEx and other logistics companies. So I think that's a big issue we can talk about. Another thing that happened this week was, I don't know if you saw the discussion, we could call it, between Jimmy Dore and Cornel West. Cornel West really pushed back when Jimmy Dore was telling him to subordinate the struggle against racism to this class struggle, as if we can have a united working class that's divided by racism. And Jimmy, Cornel, I really appreciated the way he pushed back on that. That's something we're getting from what I call the post-left, the former progressives who are now aligned with the right in terms of, groundless conspiracies and this idea that we can't talk about race or sexism or defend the rights of trans people because it divides the working class. Well, yeah, that's what divides the working class, and the working class will not be united if we don't fight against those divisions and that discrimination. And an interesting thing came out this week. One of Jimmy Dore's former co-hosts, in that circle of podcasters, Graham Elwood, has claimed that Jimmy Dore was getting $5,000 a week from a anti-vax billionaire named Peter Allard. And so that's controversy going on. So we might want to talk about those things. And then I just want to mention to people who are going to the climate march in New York City tomorrow that I will be marching with Svetlana Romanko, who's been on this podcast. She is the organizer and director of Razum We Stand, which is a Ukrainian-based climate action movement calling for tighter sanctions on Russian gas and oil to defund their war machine and keep that oil in the ground to protect the climate, and is pushing for international support for a green transition to clean energy in Ukraine and around the world. They do a lot of work with groups, particularly in Africa, like that group fighting that East African pipeline. So if you want to join us, we have a leaflet that we'll be distributing from Razum We Stand, and I will be at the main monument in the southwest corner of Central Park at noon on Sunday, and we'll gather there, and then at 12:45 we'll go down Broadway to join the march. And Svetlana is now flying into the United States, and hopefully she's not delayed, and she'll be marching with us. She has a poster that says, be the, I forget what exactly it says, but it encourages people to get active in the climate movement. So if you can be there, I'd like to see y'all in person. So if you're going to be in the march, maybe you can join our contingent. So I guess that can get us started, and I'm looking forward to your questions and comments. Email, thoughts on California filing a lawsuit against oil companies for climate risk assumption? Well, I think it's a good idea. They've certainly acted like the tobacco companies acted on the dangers of smoking, misleading the public, knowing in terms of, they knew internally that what they were doing was going to heat up the planet. They've known that, internally since the 1950s, and their subsequent studies certainly documented that. So this lawsuit should bring that out. And hopefully it leads to, penalties and compensation that supports a transition to clean energy. But I think I'm glad that suit is going forward. It's not the only one. You've got this children's suit that I guess got standing in Montana. So there's a lot going on there, and that's one front in the struggle for a Green New Deal, a real transition to a safe climate. Jimmy Dore is shilling for Brana's movement for a People's Party again, helping Dems sheepdog Dem exiters away from the growing green ranks. Yeah, I think that's what he's doing. And, we have to understand that the movement for a People's Party is a Potemkin party. It's really all in Nick Brana's mind. He's falsely presented himself as a leader in the 2016 Sanders campaign. And if you look at the document the Sanders campaign put out afterwards about who their staff was, they note that he was temporarily appointed to a national organizing position, but then quickly demoted to intern. So that's just the beginning of a long, false pretenses. And the other thing is, Brana's politics are this so-called left-right convergence, which really goes to the right and does, like Jimmy Dore's been doing, downplaying struggles against racism and sexism and homophobia. So that doesn't surprise me. I think Jimmy Dore's been a destructive presence on the left. He, for example, recently had Chris Hedges on his program, and just out of nowhere, he calls me CIA asset, groundless, baseless charge. And of course, it's the CIA and the COINTEL program that the FBI did that kind of what they call snitch jacketing. You call somebody a snitch even though you have no evidence of that, in order to divide the movement and get everybody suspicious of each other. It's very destructive. And hopefully what Graham Elwood brought out today will, open some people's eyes who've been, listening to Jimmy Dore. I think he appeals to people who are very upset, rightly so, with the Democratic Party. But then he goes and attacks, legitimate forces on the independent left. Now he's attacking Cornel West. And I just think that's destructive. He called me the death of the Green Party when I was running in 2020. He said I refused to come on his program. That was a lie. He said he did fundraising for me. That was a lie. And he's got 1.2 million followers at this point. So that gets out there. And, it's hard for a little guy like me to counter that. But, yeah, there's nothing there that he can promote. The Movement for a People's Party is, like I said, has no base, grassroots base, no ballot lines. It's just all hype. Z-Manny, do you know what Shama's workers' strike back is doing now? Are they involved with the UAW and SAG activities? I haven't followed it closely. I certainly imagine that they are certainly supporting those strikes. I just don't have a good feel for, what kind of response she's getting. She's not running for re-election. People I know in Seattle said she might have trouble getting reelected. So they're trying another means of organizing. I just don't have a good feel for what kind of response they're getting, what kind of activity they're being able to organize. I think the general idea behind it is, to support workers' struggles is good. But how effective they're being, I don't know. Nada Barca. Is the Biden administration going to show more support for auto workers than they did for the freight rail workers? It doesn't seem likely. Yeah, we'll see. Biden, I think yesterday, said that there's enough profits to be shared. The workers deserve a bigger share. So that was positive. But we don't know what goes behind the scenes. Biden did encourage both sides to keep negotiating. But what kind of arm twisting they may do, to get the workers or the company to concede or both, we don't know at this point. But what's more important than what Biden does is what we do and what the auto workers do. And it's that real movement that is where the strength is for the workers. Via email, comments on the special prosecutor asking for a gag order on Trump. Well, that just seems pretty obvious. He wants to influence witnesses and the jury pool. And, this will limit his ability to do that so the trial can go forward in a fair and impartial way. So I think that's a legitimate ask by the special prosecutor. Scout Trooper 164. Howie, I don't know if you were asked this, but what are your thoughts on Prigozhin's assassination? I wonder if it will cause long-term problems. Well, I do believe, without having direct evidence, that Putin and they call him the Siloviki, the former KGB, intelligence services people who are the core of Putin's inner circle and power structure, were behind, what happened to that plane. That's based on connecting dots and, the fact that seems like a lot of Putin's opponents are falling out of high-story windows and getting poisoned or even directly assassinated, by shootings. So that's what I, That's where I, tend to come out. Long-term problems, again, it's hard to know. We do know that a number of generals, including the guy that built those defense lines in Zaporizhia, that the Ukrainian counteroffensive is having difficulties. They're making progress, but it's slow. That guy, he was also the butcher of Syria, bombing cities to smithereens. He was removed from his post, along with another commander in Zaporizhia. So they seem to be purging the ranks to get the most loyal people. That's got to be causing internal problems within the Russian armed forces. How serious they are, time will tell. It's very hard to know. It's not exactly transparent. And, the news we get about what happened to these generals is very fragmented and doesn't come out frequently. So I think it's hard to tell what the long-term cause is, but it does show that there are problems within the Russian elite and power structure. Via email, response to meeting between Putin and Kim. Well, they're both, running very authoritarian regimes. They say there was no military agreement reached, but what Western intelligence says is that North Korea has been providing munitions to the Russian army for a couple of months now. So this may have just been a way to continue that. There's no reason for them to publicly declare it, which could trigger more sanctions against North Korea as well as Russia. So the spy masters are trying to figure out exactly what came of this. But it's not a surprise that they met, and I don't think either of them are good actors in the world today. They're authoritarians, they're anti-democratic, and they support this assault on Ukraine. Zimani, any updates, Ray, introducing legislation in New York State to help restore Green Party ballot access? I have nothing up to report that will update where we're at. We're still working with legislators to get a bill drafted, and the plan is to have it introduced right away when the legislature reconvenes in January, and try to get it adopted before they get into the budget debates in full, which happens early in the session, and the budget's supposed to be finished by April 1st. And then you have, if there's not a delay like there was this year, where it was finalized a few weeks later, then you have a scramble to get the rest of the legislative agenda passed before early June, when the legislature normally goes into recess again. So, and this being an election year, they're probably not going to extend, have a special session to do more legislation during the election campaign. So that's our plan, and we're going to do the best we can. And if we don't get that law, it's going to be very hard to get the Green Party presidential candidate on the ballot in New York. We need 45,000 signatures in 42 days. It's now the hardest ballot access petition in the United States. It's probably the hardest in the world. There may be some, I haven't found them. The closest I could find was, if you want to run as an independent for the equivalent of the Russian Congress, our Congress is called the State Duma, you need 15,000 signatures in 45 days, which is close to the old New York standard of 15,000 in 42 days. And now it's 3 times that hard in New York. So, this is a top priority for me. And I wish I had more to update you with, but that's where we're at. We're still talking to these legislators. Zimani, how long does it usually take to draft such a ballot access bill? Well, if you're a lawyer that knows how to draft legislation, frankly, I think you could do it in a day. And we've got draft language. I know the sections of the law that need to be changed. If I was a lawyer, I'd do it my damn self. And a lot of these legislators ask for that because most of them don't have capacity on their staff to draft legislation. We happen to be working with a legislator who does. So, hopefully we'll get that drafted. The main thing is it's introduced right at the beginning in January, and then, but hopefully no sooner that it's going to be introduced, and we can build a coalition to push for its passage. Any comments about Project 2025? It's a very draconian and being promoted by the Heritage Foundation and other right-wing groups. Yeah, I know generally that it's the agenda for authoritarian rule under the Republican Party. It's an attack on civil liberties, on fair elections, on independent judiciary. And I don't have the details. I haven't studied the details, but I know a lot of people are very concerned, and that it's going to be the basic prescription for Trump if he gets elected. And that is going to be a big problem because, the guy is far from a small D Democrat. And now he's made it all personal. He really wants to get revenge against, in fact, that's what he said in one of his rallies. He's in the past, in 2016, 2020, he said, "I'm your voice." Now he says, "I'm your revenge." So, that I think is a very concerning development, and it's something we need to be very worried about. Live at Content Boutique. The death toll in Libya and Morocco is shocking. Yes, it is. And equally shocking is the inability of the international community to get aid in there in a timely and sufficient fashion. The international, peacekeeping and disaster relief infrastructure, mostly through the UN, is totally inadequate and far below what it could be. So, one of the things we've got to put on our agenda is reforming the UN, expanding the Security Council, giving the General Assembly. It does have this power. It's used it in the past, but it was a resolution in 1950 called Uniting for Peace, where the General Assembly said they will step in if the Security Council can't in a situation where the UN needs to provide peacekeeping forces. So, that is something we need to work on. And what we should not be working on, the US is kind of concluding, yeah, we can't get done through the UN what we want, so we're going to do it through NATO, global NATO, which is a military alliance of the Western imperialist powers and is not going to treat all countries the same. It's going to protect the exploitive, predatory interests of Western imperialist corporations. It's not the answer. We've got to work through the UN, which was a great idea that came out of World War II to keep the peace and keep all the countries of the world talking to each other and negotiating and resolving conflicts diplomatically. So I think that's where we need to put our emphasis. And unfortunately, neither the US or Russia or China, the most powerful countries, are doing that. But I think what we can demand is that the US take the lead on that and show the rest of the world that we want to be their friends instead of being their enemies with 800 foreign military bases and all kinds of covert and overt military operations going on all over the world. That is not building peace. The US policy it's like a carpenter with a hammer. Everything looks like a nail, but the military is not the solution to a lot of these problems. It may be needed in some cases, but economic development, to a lot of these insurgencies, including the Islamic fundamentalist insurgencies, are as much about poverty. They're not so much about ideology and religion for the rank and file people participating in them. So that means we should be really focusing on real development, not getting these countries to accommodate exploitation, whether it's Western corporations, the French and Francophone Africa, or Russia through its Wagner Group, which is now being taken over by their Ministry of Defense, to exploit oil and diamonds and timber and other minerals in several African countries, Mali, Sudan, Central African Republic, where they're engaged in classic imperialist looting of raw materials. So this, I'm just saying, yeah, what's happened in Morocco and Libya is just terrible, and just as terrible is the inadequate response of the international community. Frankie Lee, Howie, Claudia de la Cruz is running as the PSL candidate for president, and she's anti-capitalist. Do you think Cornell would go in that direction as well? Sounds like a good idea. Interesting. That's news to me. I had heard secondhand that Peace and Freedom Party, which the PSL now controls through their state committee, was going to endorse Cornell West. But apparently Cornell is not as pro-Russian as PSL. So I think the politics are very different. I'm not sure where Cornell is going to finally come out on his Ukraine policy, but I know he is not a campus supporting Russia. He wants to be an internationalist. He calls Putin a gangster and Russia an empire, and as well as criticizing the U.S.-led Western imperialism. So that is not where PSL is at. They pretty much openly support Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And so, those are two different politics. They should have their own candidates. I don't think there's going to be cooperation there, although there could be some interesting debates. Ben Malley, Ukraine is a laundromat for the current administration, and the fact you don't see that lets me know your left approach doesn't allow you to take your blinders off. Well, laundromat, I'm not sure what you mean. I mean, we're laundering money by, sending weapons to Ukraine and economic aid. I think, the approach I take is basically a class analysis, an anti-imperialist analysis. The Ukrainian people are under assault by a foreign invader. The only imperialist army with hundreds of thousands of troops in Ukraine is Russia's. And so you start with, the struggle of Ukraine for national liberation. And the geopolitical machinations of both Western imperialism and Russian imperialism are secondary to what the people struggling against foreign occupation, oppression, and exploitation want. We have to support those people. And to say, well, we're going to not support the Ukrainian people because they're U.S. arms manufacturers getting paid to supply weapons to the Ukrainians is basically surrendering the Ukrainians' right to self-determination. And that's not a left approach. The left stands for the self-determination of oppressed nations. A left that says we have to side with Russian imperialists against Western imperialists is not a left. It's another form of imperialism. Scout Trooper 164. I really hate this idea that Ukraine and Russia need to endure peace talks when folks like Russian Dude and Jake Bro show over and over that Russia will strike again if given the chance. Ignorance. Russian Dude and Jake Bro, or maybe those are people in the chat, I don't know. The pacifists in this country and other parts of the world are calling for immediate ceasefire negotiations. First of all, it's completely naive. Neither Russia or Ukraine wants a ceasefire. Russia wants to get at least the rest of the 4 oblasts or states or provinces they claim to have annexed and they don't fully control. And Ukraine wants to restore control of the Ukrainian government over Ukrainian land. So neither side wants a ceasefire. Neither side trusts the other. To call for a ceasefire, suppose we got it. What does that mean for the millions of people who are under Russian occupation, who are subject to Russian laws that criminalize saying that LGBT people are normal, that criminalizes just being a a transgender person. They now have a law that's annulling marriages those people are involved in, taking away their parental rights, and denying them medical care. They've got a law pending that says feminism is an extremist ideology and its advocacy can be punished. Anybody that speaks out against the war is subject to arrest and imprisonment. The inside the occupied areas, if you show loyalty to Ukraine, you will be interrogated, detained, often tortured, subject to sexual assault, sometimes executed or just disappeared. So, that's not peace. I know these people say they want peace, but, a ceasefire leaves the violence of foreign occupation and oppression in place in the occupied territories. I think we need to stand with the Ukrainian national liberation struggle and against Russian imperialism. And right now, that's a military struggle, and neither side is going to talk. They're going to fight. I mean, we can wish all we want, but right now it's a military struggle. So the question is, what side are you on? Are you with national liberation or are you with imperialism? Ben Malley, I just don't like how the last administration in Ukraine was removed. This has nothing to do with the people, but their shot callers, whom we are funding, are as crooked as a Z. Ironically, you use a Z because that's a symbol of the Russian military occupation. That was a popular revolution. Millions took part. And what happened was the president they opposed because he was violently repressing peaceful demonstrations. It was a kleptocratic crook that enriched himself and his buddies. It was anti-oligarchic, anti-corruption, pro-democratic. And Yanukovych fled. So then the parliament replaced him with an appointed president and elections 10 weeks later, which elected a president. So that government, is elected by the people of Ukraine. And the first government was somewhat Ukrainian nationalists under Poroshenko. And he got clobbered in the next election in 2019 by Zelensky. In the runoff, it was Zelensky versus Poroshenko. And Zelensky got 75% or so of the vote. And he ran on a civic nationalism, a multicultural Ukraine, not the ethno-nationalism that Poroshenko had been promoting. So I think, you need to acknowledge that that's what the current government of Ukraine is in terms of the ethnic politics of Ukraine. But at the same time, that government needs to be criticized by the left because it is adopting very extreme neoliberal policies with respect to labor and selling land that was public or not sellable to foreigners. And, the labor movement and the progressive social movements are fighting back against that in Ukraine. The Zelensky administration thinks that will make them make Ukraine more open to foreign investment, which they'll need to reconstruct. But at what cost to the people? There's the social infrastructure of Ukraine is devastated between being bankrupt because of this war and the new neoliberal policies they're implementing. Policies that go further than the EU would like, particularly in the labor field. They've been criticized in their labor reforms by the International Labor Organization and the EU for that. So that's a developing situation. But that was a revolution. I mean, the people opposed to that are counter-revolutionary as far as I'm concerned. Yanukovych had, where he really screwed up was when on November 30th, after mostly students had been on the Maidan protesting against Yanukovych's flip-flop on a trade agreement with the EU, they were getting ready to leave. This was a Saturday night. They're going to leave on Sunday. No doubt the intelligence services of Ukraine knew that. And Yanukovych sent in the Berkut, the riot police, and they beat the hell out of these students. I mean, serious injuries with batons and, people were hospitalized, permanently disabled. And that's when the demonstration went from a few thousand to hundreds of thousands overnight. Because people said you just can't treat our children that way. And that was the end for Yanukovych, even though it took 3 months to play out. Ben Mali, we are at war with Russia and trying to pretend we're not. We're foolish to assist any country at war with a country we don't want to go at war with. You're still leaving the Ukrainians out. They're at war with Russia. Russia's attacked them, and we're supporting their self-defense. I mean, that's like saying, Russia and China should not have supported the Vietnamese in their struggle against U.S. imperialism in Vietnam, because, it would extend the war, and, indirectly they are at war with the U.S., blah, blah, blah. We should support people struggling for their freedom. That's what the left is about. And, the Ukrainians should not just be dismissed as, a casualty of global geopolitics and spheres of influence between great powers. That's the politics of Henry Kissinger and John Mearsheimer and these so-called foreign policy realists, who basically see, foreign policy as, balancing power between great powers, and the small countries are just casualties in that struggle, and what they want doesn't matter. What they do want does matter, especially for those on the left. We want people to be free and democratic and control their own destiny. Lenny Liff, we should support America and Americans, not Ukraine and NATO. We should support the international working class, irregardless of what states people are in. The America First stuff, that's Trumpian stuff. And it's certainly not a position, of international social solidarity, which the left should be about. Scout Trooper 164, Elon Musk has gotten controversy for turning the satellites off when Ukraine used drones to hit Crimea. What are your views on it? It's a bit convenient, not to mention his excuse was bad. The story is, there are two stories. One is he turned them off. The other is he never turned them on in the first place. But, he himself has said he decided after talking to Russian leaders that if Ukraine did hit Crimea, they would respond with a nuclear response. And so Elon Musk took it upon himself, he thought, to stop a nuclear war. Of course, Ukraine hit Crimea and Russia didn't nuke anybody. I think the problem here is you got one guy, I guess now the richest guy in the world, controlling all these satellites, thousands of satellites in the sky. And not to mention, an electric car manufacturer, and what else is he doing? SpaceX. These things probably should be public utilities and publicly owned so they can act in the public interest, and not, be the, he owns Twitter, or now X, which is another problem. I mean, this guy is one guy with more power than most of the heads of state in the world, and more resources at his fingertips. And, that's not democratic. And, he is politically, leans toward the right. He's, certainly anti-working class. It's a big problem. And it's why we need socialist solutions to these problems, not, whining and criticizing these capitalists for what they do. Capitalists do what they do like skunks stink. I mean, that's what they are. Now to Barca, it's a shame we have to take him so seriously. He's a great argument against capital himself. Yes, indeed. But we got to take him seriously because he does have all that capital and power. Scout Trooper 164, Putin wants Russia to be remade into an empire. If he can take Ukraine, he'll take over the former Soviet Union states again. There are people in Russian state media saying, we should go after Poland next, we being Russia. I think, they don't want to do that because that would lead to a fight with NATO and a World War III and a disaster for everybody. But there are states like Moldova, Georgia, um, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, who are very worried that Russia, does want to bring them back within their empire, which doesn't have to be formal. It's like the United States empire. It's a neo-colonial empire, and Russia has had neo-colonial control over some of these countries, but they are asserting their independence, and they're very critical of the invasion of Ukraine. But Putin, ideologically, he wants to be the next Peter the Great and Catherine the Great and restore the Russian Empire. His ideology is based on long, old time great Russian chauvinism. And, so that's a problem. It's an imperialist ideology, and he's acting on it. So, I think that's another reason why, Ukraine's national liberation struggle is important, because it will hopefully deter Putin from going after other countries. I don't think the East European countries like Poland and Czechoslovakia and so forth are likely to be attacked anytime soon. It's more those Central Asian and Caucasus countries, and perhaps next the Baltic states, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, which are small, very close to Russia. A quick invasion like they tried in Ukraine might work, although they're NATO countries, which, I think is a big deterrence for Russia. So, and that's not to speak of the internal colonies that Russia has built up over the same time the U.S., settler colonialism built up, the United States and then its neo-colonial empire around the world. There are, many peoples in Central and Eastern Russia, Siberia, and Central Asia that feel they are second-grade subordinate peoples within the Russian Federation. So there's that issue as well. So I would say, it is an empire. It just, Putin wants to restore the influence of the great Russian power over, what it had before. It would like to bring Poland under its wing, maybe not formally taking it over, but making it politically and economically subordinate and controlled by Russia, as it was in Soviet times. So I think that's more the likely danger, not a direct military invasion. Lenny Liff, the agreement with Gorbachev was not one more inch toward Russia. We broke that agreement. That's true. It was not a formal agreement, not a treaty, but what's his name? Bush's Secretary of State, James Baker, did say that to Russia, to Gorbachev and other Russian leaders. And, at that time, Gorbachev was calling for, let's have a trans-European security arrangement for our common home. He made a famous speech just before the Soviet Union collapsed, calling for a common European home for all European countries. And unfortunately and disastrously, the United States did not take him up on that, or subsequent leaders like Yeltsin and the early Putin, when it was still more likely that that could be done. Instead, not Bush 1, but Clinton and Bush 2 aggressively pushed eastward. Now, some of those countries aggressively asked to be included in NATO because they were afraid of Russia, understandably. But it should have taken, the Organization for Security, OSCE, Security and Cooperative, I forget what it stands for, but it's a trans-European organization that could have been a framework for developing that. So, the U.S. really, under Clinton and then Bush followed up, they decided we're not going to establish a world where the U.S. shares power with other powers, but we're going to be the unipolar superpower. And that has been a disaster. A lot of wars, Iraq and Afghanistan most notably. And, now Russia, at least saying that, they're afraid of NATO, so their invasion of Ukraine is a preventive war to defend themselves from from NATO. I really don't buy that because, all the countries on Russia's border got there by 2004, except Finland now, since the invasion, which added like 1,000 kilometers of border of Russia directly with NATO. But, it was not a immediate security threat to Russia. And, the U.S. should have been talking to Russia. We unilaterally pulled out of the Anti-Ballistic Missiles Treaty and the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Russia pulled out of the Conventional Forces Treaty. We pulled out of the Open Skies Treaty. And now they're not talking to renew the SALT Treaty, the START Treaty, the Strategic Arms Treaty, New START. So, that's what the United States should be doing. I mean, call Putin's bluff saying that NATO, he was scared of NATO. Okay, let's negotiate these nuclear arms agreements, get them back on track, and then let's figure out a way to have a trans-European security arrangement where everybody feels safe and their security is guaranteed. That should be our diplomatic approach. And, I've been saying that's what the United States should be challenging Putin to do. Now, they have not as aggressively as I would like, but they've, said to Putin, let's get back into these New START negotiations. And Putin basically said in a Russian metaphor, fuck them. He said that, I think, last June. He doesn't want to negotiate either, but I think we need to call him out publicly, and that should be the stance of U.S. and the West, that we want to negotiate these things. And we should apologize for what we did back in the 90s when we didn't take Gorbachev up on his proposal for a common European home. And I think those initiatives would, if we were able to make progress on that and Putin decided that was better than losing in Ukraine, he could withdraw and say he won the security objectives he wanted. I think that is a possible path to peace in Ukraine. Not a Barca. I've seen people already calling the Greens spoilers, and I'm hopeful that ranked choice voting and other democratic reforms can get a lot of attention in the lead up to the election year. I think what you're saying, Nada, is very important. I've been talking to Cornel West about that. We're going to do a briefing with some Greens who are longtime experts and campaigners for ranked choice voting and proportional representation. And, we'll be urging Cornel to center that. He's begun talking more about it, but, try to deepen his understanding of these reforms and the legislation that's pending in Congress for proportional ranked choice voting to elect the House, proportional representation, ranked choice voting for election of senators, proportional or ranked choice national popular vote for president. And I think, talk to him about the messaging. I think I would like to see Cornel say, when he's asked that, when the media says, well, you're a spoiler, say, we got the solution to the spoiler question. It's ranked choice voting for the presidential election. And then challenge the media and challenge Joe Biden to join him in calling for that. And, sort of change the terms of debate, where the debate now assumes we're in this, winner take all, plurality wins system, which does create the possibility of the center and left splitting their vote and electing the right. And on the right-hand side, libertarians and Republicans splitting the vote and electing a Democrat. So, there's a good reason why lots of people from different points in the political spectrum should be behind ranked choice voting. And I think that is an issue because people, we know that polls, they say over 60% of the people want another major third party. They're dissatisfied with the Democrats and Republicans. There are more people who are registered as independent or third party than there are in either the Democratic or Republican parties. So this is an issue where there are lots of people willing to listen, open to it, because they want some real changes. So I think, and it's not just Cornell West. Wherever Greens are running, I urge them to make this one of their top 2 or 3 or 4 issues, because we can do it at the municipal level. We can do it at the state level. And it's something that is growing fast. I think now's the time to push while the iron is hot. We went from 2000 to 2020, we went from 1 to about 20 jurisdictions using ranked choice voting. And then since 2020, it's grown to 51 and pending in many, many more jurisdictions. There'll be a referendum in Oregon to extend it to all Oregon state offices. I think that's in 2024. There's legislation in many states as well as municipalities. And as I mentioned, there's this bill before Congress where, those of us who are in the jurisdictions of progressive Democrats, where the hell are they on this? I wrote an article for Ralph Nader's Capitol Hill Citizen about this. And the subtitle, which, the paper gave to it was, AOC and the squad are AWOL on proportional representation and ranked choice voting. They should be pushing that. I mean, it was AOC, and I started the article by noting this, who said in an interview, I think with the New Yorker, or maybe it was Politico, anyway, that in any other country, she would not be in the same party with Joe Biden, referring to countries that have proportional representation. And that was when she was still supporting Sanders in the primaries. She's dropped that since, but, she should not be in the same party with Joe Manchin, let alone Joe Biden. But she is because of the electoral system we've got. So people like her should be supporting this, and we should be putting the heat on people like her to get on board, particularly for that bill in the House. It's called the Fair Representation Act. And, the left should be pushing that. The left has kind of been AWOL as well on these electoral reforms. So Nada, I think you're right. This is it's a game-changing issue for us, and it's something we really need to focus on. See, Monty, any developments recruiting more Greens to run down ballot races? I remember you've been pushing to increase these numbers. Yeah, more and more candidates are popping up, coming forward, and I hope to have some of them on the podcast soon. I wish it was, more of a mass movement, like it was a mass movement into the DSA during the Sanders campaigns. And now, DSA is somewhat in crisis because, they've lost a lot of members. A lot of those people don't want to be in the capitalist Democratic Party. And they think the electoral focus on electing liberal Democrats, not even always socialists, is not helping the socialist movement. So what we really need is a corresponding movement into the independent left politics. And just as important, in organizing local parties that are engaged not just in elections, but between elections on the issues, on political education. And, that's how we can build an independent left in this country. So, yeah, Mani, I think we have more candidates stepping forward. We need to keep encouraging it, and we need a lot more because this should be a movement. And, Cornell's been saying that. It just can't be his campaign. So let's hope that develops. Then Mally, do you think it not being a big push is writing on the wall? Writing on the wall that we're defeated, I don't think it's that. It's that we're not as strong as we could be and should be. It's also telling us what we do need to push. So I'm kind of an optimistic guy. I like to see the glass half full and we can fill it up rather than thinking it has a leak that we can't patch. So, yeah, I mean, it would be better if there were more, but we'll go with what we got to do the best we can and then just keep building. Scout Trooper 164. The Dems are doing whatever they can to keep Greens out. They're suing to remove ranked choice voting out of states and really seem to put their spoiler alerts on high settings. Yeah, it's actually the Republicans who are leading in banning ranked choice voting in states. But the Democrats, in Washington, D.C., for example, there's a it's either legislation or a ballot initiative. I think it's a ballot initiative to go to ranked choice voting, and the Democrats are opposed. They're like the Republicans because there are no Republicans hardly in Washington, D.C. So the Dems have filled that role, and they're opposed. Most of them, some are for it, but most of them are opposed. The statehood Green Party, of course, is for it, and it looks like it's going to be on the ballot. Last I saw, so the citizens of Washington, D.C. will have an opportunity to establish ranked choice voting. I think that's where it stands. But yeah, it's not just the Republicans, it's the Democrats too. And, I think what, the thoughtful establishment Democrats realize is that the progressive left independent platform, Medicare for all, Green New Deal, tax the rich, student debt relief, and on, is more popular than what the Democrats are offering. And if we do go to ranked choice voting, not only will the spoiler problem be removed, but in a lot of places, people are going to vote the Greens instead of the Democrats. And the Democrats are afraid of that. That's why they just want to keep the Greens out, the anti-democratic Democrats. So, we've got to build coalitions. And it's going to involve some Democrats, some Republicans, some Libertarians, as well as Greens and other independent lefties. But like I said earlier, we are making progress on this reform. And now is the time to push because we've got the momentum. Chris Blankenhorn, writing on the wall I see from the state of the democracy movement is that we can't rely on Dems to carry this torch. We need a popular movement against both capitalist parties and their stranglehold on policy reform. Yeah, I think that writing's definitely on the wall. The Democrats, not just on electoral reform, they can't fight the damn fascists. Joe Biden is still talking about bipartisanship with the party that tried to overthrow his election. They accommodate and normalize the neo-fascist Republicans instead of fighting them. And so we can't rely on them to fight the right. Some people say we're going to spoil the election. I think we can improve the election. We've had examples in the past. When Henry Wallace was running in 1948, Truman was way behind Dewey until he adopted basically Wallace's domestic program, which was expanding the New Deal. And Truman then caught up to Dewey and won by election day. I think a similar thing happened with Al Gore. He was running as Clinton II. And then after Labor Day, he came out with the slogan, with the people, not the powerful, and put forward more populist policy demands. And he started catching up to Bush, who he'd been trailing all along. And he won on election day. We know from the recount in Florida that the media did. But he caught up. In both those cases, we improved the election. So I think that's another answer to the spoiler question. We don't spoil elections, we improve them. Another answer is we bring out voters who otherwise wouldn't vote. We do have data from 2016. Exit polls showed that 61% of Jill Stein's voters would have stayed home if she had not been on the ballot. So you go to those close states where they blame Stein for Trump's victory, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And if you plug in that 61%, it's not even close. Trump would have won anyway. So I think there are a lot of answers to the spoiler problem, but I think the main thing we should do is a positive answer. We got a solution. It's ranked choice voting. And, where are the Democrats on that? Why won't they join us? And we'll get rid of the spoiler problem and let the voters vote for who they want without worrying about helping their worst enemy. Chris Kennedy, are you running for president at the moment, or is it just Mr. West running for the Greens? I'm not running. Starting a campaign is like starting a business. And my campaign team from 2020, a lot of them have kids, new jobs. They're up to their ears in that. A couple of the key people passed away. So I'd have to start from scratch. So it's logistically a problem. And, I like Cornell, his positions on the issues are compatible with mine. I have some quibbles with him, maybe on Ukraine. We're still talking that through. Um, and, I could, and I have been, giving him some advice on how to message, my 2 cents worth. So I'm supporting Cornell. There are other people running for the Greens. And I guess you go to the Green Party webpage, gp.org, and you will start seeing who's fulfilled the requirements to be recognized as a candidate. I know a number of people have stepped forward. But at this point, I'm trying to help Cornell West. Okay, I see the sign. I see a quick question. Vicki Corden, who is Cornell West running mate? He hadn't chosen one. Yeah, there we are.
Hey everybody, I don't know where Howie went right there. He dropped. So he must have lost his internet connection. But to answer Vicky's that Howie was saying, he hasn't declared a running mate yet, and Howie's back, so I'm going to add him back in right now.
I don't know what happened. I might have hit a button I didn't know I hit. But anyway, Cornell hasn't chosen a running mate, and I haven't even heard much speculation. I know Chris Hedges suggested Shama Saman. I don't know if that's in the hopper or not. Haven't heard any other names. So it's early. I think Cornell's still trying to get his campaign better organized, and he's got a lot of requirements to meet to get on ballots. He has some deadlines coming up soon to get on the California Green primary ballot. So there's a lot going on. Running a campaign is very complicated. 51 different jurisdictions to qualify for the ballot, and the Greens are a contentious bunch. So he's got to, be in communication with the rank and file Greens and let them know he's with them and wants their support. So he's got a lot of work to do. Picking a running mate is just one of many, many tasks. So, yeah, we were wrapping up. It's been an hour. I got to get down to New York City now for this climate march tomorrow. And if you want to join me and some others leafleting on behalf of Razum We Stand, a Ukrainian climate action group calling to keep Russian oil in the ground, stronger sanctions against Russian oil and gas and coal, and supporting a green transition in Ukraine and the world. We will be meeting in the southwest corner of Central Park at the main monument, which is right near the subway exit at Columbus Circle, where a lot of people going to the march will go. And we will be there between noon and 12:45, and then we're going to walk down Broadway to join the march and hand out the leaflets. And the march will go across town to the UN. There'll be a short rally, well, maybe not so short, but I heard there are only 3 speakers. I don't know who they are. But anyway, it'll be an opportunity to, make our concerns known. The UN has its Climate Ambitions Summit on Thursday. Svetlana Romanko, who heads up Razum We Stand, will be marching with us. If you recall, she was the Ukrainian at the climate summit in Egypt who confronted the Russian delegation when they were making their presentation and got thrown out. She just walked up to them and started telling them what she thought about their invasion, and she got escorted out of the conference. And you can look up, it was in November last year, 2022. Democracy Now! Did a nice interview and also had a film clip of what she did in front of the Russian delegation, along with some other supporters in that audience. So Svetlana will be there. She'll be here all week, trying to make her concerns known to the climate movement and world leaders. So anyway, we will be, or I will be, with some others at the main monument at noon tomorrow. And from there, we'll get into the climate march and hand out these flyers and, join the procession. So if you're in the New York City area, want to join us, we'd love to see you. And otherwise, I will be back here next week. Don't have a guest scheduled, but we might have one. There are a number of possibilities. We'll see how the week goes. So have a good week, everybody.